week.
You didn't have last week up such that I couldn't see. Matter of fact, the last 2 weeks weren't up that I saw.
Oh yeah, we've been going back and forth about what we stream and what we don't, but it's streaming now. Okay, so no thoughts, no anythings. We should just jump in.
Jump in.
Let's jump in. Okay, yeah, and we ended. Anyone write this down? We should start doing that.
I think we were on page 14.
We were talking about demons.
Yeah, we've been through
Yeah.
this. This is 15 now. The Gemara says, new sturdy read. Okay, remember this.
No, I think we had come to a stopping point somewhere on 14, and you didn't want to go any further.
I think we were going back to where the sages taught in a Tosefta. I think that's where we stopped.
We've done right here, you're saying, Sean?
Yeah. I think that's where we stopped.
Tosafot.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, let's take it from there. Someone want to read?
Wait, I haven't found it except on yours.
We're right in 15.
Okay.
The sages taught
3B, if you're looking at up somewhere.
Yeah, I am.
Is this where you wanted, Dan, Rabbi Daniel? The sages taught in the Tosefta?
Yeah, please.
The night is comprised of 4 watches. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Natan says, the night is comprised of 3 watches. The Gemara explains, what is Rabbi Natan's reasoning? As it is written, and Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the edge of camp at the beginning of the middle watch. It was taught in the Tosefta. Middle means nothing other than there is one before it and one after it.
Okay, that actually seems kind of reasonable, right? Like a lot of these text proofs that we get seem just absurd, but this seems like a pretty good text proof.
So far. And you know there's going to be a curve coming up.
Of course.
From the fact that the verses okay. From the fact that the verse refers to a middle watch, the fact that the night is comprised of 3 watches may be inferred. And what does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi say about this proof? He argues that it is inconclusive.
Paul,
Everyone
we
else-
lost your audio.
Yeah, you went silent, Paul. Yeah, we can't hear you. You dropped off at some point. I don't know if your headphones got unplugged.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear
Now
you.
we can.
Okay. And how would Rabbi Natan respond? He would say, despite Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's objection, is one of the middle watches written in the verse. The middle watch is written. This indicates that the night is comprised of only 3 watches.
I think I kind of agree with that statement because using middle, you need an odd number. Using the old Babylonian and actually, I think it goes back to Sumerian calendar clock, you have 12 hours a day and 12 hours a night. You can divide 12 hours easily into 3 watches of 4 hours each. You couldn't do it so easily with 5 hours or 7 hours or something like that. You could do it with 4, but middle really does kind of indicate that there's equal number on either side.
Not necessarily. Yeah, I guess I could.
Well, the other thing is, I don't know if they went by hours back then. So
They didn't have hours.
They
Remember,
Certainly
we
a
were
different
talking,
concept. Yeah.
remember we were talking about time and how time is different now than it was then. I'm sorry. that our conception of time is very different because they were going by sundown and sunrise and 3 stars. They didn't necessarily have hours.
You had uh, the old Sumerian clock, or what I guess you'd call it a clock. It's not really a clock. It probably was more like a sundial.
Google. Are you
Evenly,
Google?
evenly allowed dividing the day into 12 equal hours, because of the fact that the sun would move across the dial evenly across the day. The night, they also gave 12 hours, even though the 12 hours like an hour in the December 31st was obviously much larger than an hour June not 31st, 21st, obviously much larger than June 21st, when that's the shortest day of the year, at least in the northern hemisphere.
So let's keep going with some text here. Someone want to read?
What is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's reasoning? Am I in the right place? Rabbi
Yeah, please.
Zerkai said that Rabbi Amin Ami said that Rabbi I'm having trouble with my Yoshua ben Levi said, this is unreal. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's opinion is based on a comparison of 2 verses. One verse says, at midnight I rise to give thanks for your righteous laws. And the other verse says, my eyes forestall the watches that I will speak of your word. That's from Psalms. Taken together, these verses indicate that their author, King David, rose at midnight 2 watches before dawn in order to study Torah.
Because that's what David's famous for, is his real attention to biblical study.
Right. And how did he know it was midnight? Is that, the moon is not necessarily up at midnight, is it? Up high, straight up?
No.
No,
Remember, midnight's not 12. Midnight is literally the opposite of noon.
Okay.
It's the point, it's the peak of the night, middle of the night. It's not 12 o'clock every night. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I still have a question of how you know when that is.
That I don't know.
Yeah, that's okay.
So go ahead and finish the paragraph.
Okay. My eyes forestall the watches, and I will speak of your word. Taken together, I got past that. King David rose at midnight. How is it possible to reconcile these 2 verses? Only if there are 4 watches in the night does one who rises 2 watches before dawn rise at midnight. So they're saying there's 4 watches, not 3 watches. Right?
Well, are they talking about having 2 middle watches between 1 and 4? In the previous paragraph, they kept saying 2 middle watches, and I was just kind of curious about that.
Well, that's the setup here, is that it's 2
Right.
middle watches. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's 4 watches, they're saying, not 3. And how does Rabbi Natan reconcile these 2 verses? He holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, for we learned in a Mishnah that Rabbi Yeshua says, one is permitted to recite the morning Shema during the time when people rise until the 3rd hour of the day, as is the custom of kings to rise during the 3rd hour. Since it is customary for kings to rise during the 3rd hour of the day, if David rose at midnight, he would be awake for 6 hours of the night.
Are you dressed to go outside in a bit?
Sorry.
Is someone trying to say something, or is it just background noise?
Just background noise.
Oh, okay. Which amounts to 2 watches. Therefore, King David could say that he forestalls the watches as he rose 2 watches before the rest of the kings in the world. I have a question. What is the importance of this?
Okay, thoughts? What is actually being discussed here?
How to divide time.
How to divide time. And here, in some ways, I think we are trying to reconcile 2 different rabbis who have different opinions that they're not comfortable with the idea that they don't agree with each other.
Yeah.
Are they going back to the argument of when the Shema is recited?
Yeah, but it's a good point that we've totally left behind the original conversation
Right.
question here. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's some recognition here that, you know, the division of time in a conventional way, that is an agreement on a convention, is useful for a given society. And possibly, I mean, Toby, I think you were saying, how did they know what time it was?
Yeah.
You know, once this sort of thing, now, you know, I mean, this argument is all very academic because they're talking about a time that is either past or has been disrupted at the time that they're discussing it. But presumably there was some kind of agreement, and there was somebody calling, you know, the watch. I mean, that was, I think, a fairly well-established practice in urban areas, that somebody, you know, it's standing in some tower or on the top of some building, who had a great voice, would literally call the hour, call the watch. And I guess, you know, I mean, just thinking of the word watch, literally also it would be a time when certain guards or sentinels would change, you know, like a changing of the guard almost.
Yeah. And they would have to have some way of judging when the watch was going to change.
Okay, let's keep going. We're going to get into some juicy things if we keep surfing here.
Rav Ashi said that the verses can be reconciled in accordance with Rabbi Natan's opinion in another way.
Right. So
One-
now that's a hint here that what the Talmud's really doing is trying to reconcile 2 differing opinions more than anything else.
Right. God forbid they should disagree. 1 1/2 watches are still called watches in plural. Therefore, King David could rise at midnight, yet maintain that he forestalls the watches.
Okay, just another approach. Let's keep going.
If someone else want to take a turn?
Sure. Following this discussion, another halakha that Rabbi Zerika said that Rabbi Ami said that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said is cited.
Okay, so right, like now in the Talmud, we've simply got another statement that's put in here, not because it has any connection to the theme or to the content, but because it's something else that has this whole long chain that, Toby, you even remarked on the first time we saw it.
But before the dead, one may speak only of matters relating to the dead, as speaking of other matters appears to be contemptuous of the deceased, underscoring that he is unable to talk while those around him can. Therefore, one must remain fully engaged in matters relating to him.
Okay, keep going.
Two traditions exist with regard to the details of this halakha in the name of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. According to one version, Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said, this halakha was only said with regard to matters of Torah. Speaking of other matters, however, it is not prohibited, since no contempt is expressed for the deceased by the fact that he is unable to speak of such topics.
And take the next paragraph too, because the next tradition is the exact opposite of the previous tradition.
Others say another version of this halakha in the name of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. This halakha was said even with regard to matters of Torah, and all the more so with regard to other matters.
Okay, right. So the debate here, we have two different traditions of the exact same saying. One of them says this was said only with regard to matters of Torah, and the other one is this was said even with regard to matters of Torah. So one word changes. Two different people have totally different opinions as to what Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana's tradition here is. But how do we take all three of these paragraphs? What do we do with this short little meditation on not speaking nourishkeit in front of dead people, in front of dead bodies?
Excuse me, what's nourishkeit?
Oh, ridiculousness. Yeah.
My question is, why did they insert this here?
Well, they inserted it because it's the same oral tradition, right? This is also a Rabbi Zarika, B'Shem Rabbi Ami, B'Shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi.
Okay. So what they're saying, you're supposed to show respect for the dead by just talking about the dead before they're buried?
So this, we're talking actually physically with the person, and this continues today to be a custom, I guess a halakha. I know it as a custom, but that when you are in the presence of a dead body with someone who's died recently, that it's not the place to be discussing other matters. Right, which kind of, I see we're all nodding because we all kind of just like feel it, right? You don't need a halakha to feel that.
It's just a sort of a matter of respect.
Yeah.
In the face of somebody's mortality, that, you know, normal life takes a pause.
Yes. It's also a meditation on embarrassment, I think. Right. The rabbis are real big on not shaming someone, not embarrassing someone. And they're even extending that to people who have died. Right. Look at the logic that they're using here. Why is it that you can't talk about these things in front of someone who's died? What's that? FOMO, fear of missing out.
No.
Right? Like they'll feel bad that they can't take part.
So like a wake where you discuss the good things, the bad things, the wonderful things, the special things is not really appropriate.
That's one of the traditions here. And we're talking again only in front of the person or in front of the person's body. So okay,
Daniel,
oh yeah, please, Renee.
So, you know, with the sort of halakhic, or maybe it's just customary practice that the Orthodox stay up with the body through the night. And presumably there may be more than one person. It's possible that these individuals would get bored and would be tempted to just gossip or talk about any other matter. So perhaps it's just sort of a warning, or, you know, a sort of posting of boundaries.
Nice. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, incidental to the Gemara's mention of King David, other sources are cited that describe his actions. Regarding that which was cited above, that he would rise in the middle of the night in order to serve his creator, the Gemara asks, did David rise at midnight? He rose in the evening. As it is written, I rose with the neshef and cried, I hoped for your word, from Psalms. And how do we know that this neshef, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Is the evening, as it is written in the neshef, in the evening day, in the blackness of night and the darkness. Apparently, King David did indeed rise when it was still evening.
Okay. So now we've got a verse that's questioning whether or not David really got up in the evening, or whether he got up at midnight, or whether he got up in the evening. Okay, let's see what we're doing with this. By the way, famously, what's the most famous line about David getting up? That's what's funny to me, is we haven't referenced it yet. Does anyone have a strong association with David rising?
Wasn't that after his son died?
Okay.
That
I'm not
was the one you were thinking of, but
not the one I was thinking of. No. The one I'm thinking of is there's the story of David and Bathsheba, which is it's a real trash talking of David.
Mm.
If people haven't read it that way before, Bathsheba and David is really, the whole story from the very beginning is all about trashing David, probably as a polemic by Northerners against the South is probably what it's really about. But it begins by saying something like, in the time of the season when kings go to war, David stayed in Jerusalem and would rise late in the afternoon. Right, the whole thing's trashing him, including the fact that he's not getting up at, like, presumably he's hungover and waking up at like 3 in the afternoon or something is the idea there. It really is presenting him as party boy. So anyways, I think it's interesting that we keep talking about when David rose, but haven't gotten there yet. So, okay, someone want to take this?
The Gemara.
Okay, go ahead.
The Gemara suggests several ways to resolve this contradiction. Rabbi Oshaya said that Rabbi Aha said, David said as follows, midnight never passed me by in my sleep. Sometimes I fulfilled the verse. I rose with the neshef and cried. But I always at least fulfilled the verse. At midnight I rise to give thanks for your righteous laws.
Okay, this is kind of funny, right? Like, why do we have all these different things? Because David was a bad sleeper. He was always waking up. He got up at all sorts of different times. Okay, let's keep going. Unless someone had a thought.
Quick question. No, it's
yeah, Paul.
Question. Okay, because I always thought Neshef was a soul. So what are they stating here with the Neshef, where he rose with the Neshef?
Neshef.
The letters are opposite. Nefesh is soul.
Okay.
Yeah. I made the same mistake there when I looked at it for a second. It's a time, and we're trying to establish what time that is.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay, Rabbi Zaira.
Rabbi Zaira said, until midnight, David would doze like a horse, as a horse dozes, but never sleeps deeply. From midnight on, he would gain the strength of a lion.
This is so funny. This whole Talmudic discussion of David's sleep habits.
Rav Ashi said, until midnight, he would study Torah. As it is written, I rose with the Neshef and cried, I hope for your word. And from midnight on, he would engage in songs and praise. As it is written, At midnight, I rise to give thanks.
That man needed a sleeper.
Yeah.
Do you want
Okay,
me
let's keep going.
to this point? The discussion has been based on the assumption that Neshef means evening. The Gemara asks, does Neshef really mean evening? Doesn't Neshef mean morning?
Oh,
Yes, it is written, and David slew them from the Neshef until the evening of the next day, from 1 Samuel. Doesn't this verse mean from the morning until the night? In which case, Neshef must mean morning.
Okay, so I want to hone in on one thing here that's so common that we all often miss it, which is that there's a ton of words in Hebrew that we don't really know the meaning of. Like there's all sorts of words in the Torah that we don't really know, and we're making our best guess. Particularly anytime you encounter those long lists of the things in the wilderness, like in this kind of ruby, in this kind of wood, and dolphin skin, they're just making that stuff up often. I mean, not like making it up wholesale, but radically different views.
Excuse me. What are the actual letters for Neshef, and what were the original letters in the Proto-Hebrew? What did they mean?
Neshef is Nun Shin Fe. And we're debating what it means right here. They don't understand it either.
Now, I was reading an article that was talking about the fact that possibly even as late as the period as the Second Temple period, that a lot of the words were still pictographic in their meaning. Like, a house meant strength, and it's where we get like Abba is the strong person in the house, is the father.
Well, the other thing that happens is that everyone in those days knows what this word means.
Yeah.
But by the time we get to the Talmud, it's not as clear. And I know that there's a lot of words because I've read some books by linguists, and they said, we're not sure what it means. All we can do is look at how it's used in different places in Torah.
And that's what they're doing right here.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
And that's
King
what they're
David
doing.
would have lived 1,500 years before this discussion.
Right.
In fact, they are almost in the exact same relationship to King David that we are to them.
Yeah, right.
Right. Isn't the word for a young woman or a virgin, that's one word that they're not sure about. There's a lot of words that you come across that
Yeah, that's why we just write Toby in the ketubah.
That's boy, I
okay.
gotta tell you about my ketubah. It has more written in it. Whenever I want him to do something and he doesn't want to, I'll tell him, Stuart, it's written in the ketubah
Us
that
too.
you have to do it.
We always say that it's in our ketubah that you're not allowed to overrule Google Maps.
Right.
Okay, let's keep reading.
The ketubah is very handy, Daniel.
Okay, let's keep reading. Someone jump in.
To this point, discussion has been based on the assumption that Neshef means
That we
evening.
read.
Oh, we
Next.
read that. Oh, sorry. The Gemara responds, no, this verse means that David slew them from one evening until the next evening. In other words,
Only the Talmud could take like the slaughter of all of these people and turn it into like a really kind of boring discussion about
A
this.
linguistic discussion of a word.
But they
Right?
didn't consider this boring at all. That's
Yeah.
what
It's fascinating.
Oh yeah. I mean, I love it. Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting.
Okay, let's keep going.
the Gemara rejects this response. If so, let the verse be written from the Neshef until the Neshef, or from the evening until the evening. Why would the verse employ two different terms for a single concept?
Reasonable.
It's a literary choice.
We really don't know. Anyway. Rather, Rava said, there are 2 times referred to as neshef, and the word can refer to either evening or morning. Neshef must be understood in accordance with its Aramaic root.
There we
The
go.
night moves past neshef, and the day arrives. And the day moves past neshef, and the night arrives. Oh, that's a neat
Well, now
explanation.
they
Yeah, I
they
like
have it
that.
on with
Very
an A.
neat.
So what is
They move-
Rava's opinion? What would we call this time?
Even,
Dawn or twilight?
I think
Time of
dusk or dawn, right?
transition.
dusk or
Yeah.
dawn, yeah.
Twilight, I like that. I like that.
You know, if it were Rashi, it wouldn't be the Aramaic route. He would be going into the Old French.
Old French, yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
You know how I like on my computer, you know, when I first open it and I get this nice little sort of image of a sand dune with
Yeah.
different kinds of light on it, depending what time of the day it is. And
Part I hadn't
Oh.
noticed. I'll have to look at that.
yeah, it's 6 a.m. It's like, you know, like it's sort of dawning. It's kind of crepuscular, you know, a twilight. But
Cool.
the same is true later. So you could, it's hard to tell which is which.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you moved it. I keep wanting to move it using my finger because I'm on my iPad more than I am on my iBook. So, okay. One day, you want me to take over or you?
Go
still-
for it.
Arguan can read.
Yeah, I can. Is
Guan's been voluntold here.
the Gemara clarifies? Yeah, okay.
No, when King
Above
David
it.
said.
No, yeah, the paragraph before.
Okay. When King David said, "At midnight I rise," the assumption is that he rose precisely at midnight. The Gemara asks, did David know exactly when it was midnight? Even Moses, our teacher, did not know exactly when it was midnight.
This was our question earlier.
Now,
Mhm.
how do we know this about Moses? As it is written that he said to Pharaoh, "Thus said the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt." The word "about" indicates it was only an approximation. The Gemara clarifies, what is the meaning of the expression "about midnight"? Did Moses say it or did God say it? If we say that the Holy One, blessed be him, blessed be itself, said about midnight to Moses, is there doubt before God in heaven?
Right? God knows when
Rather-
it's midnight.
Yeah, you would hope. Rather, this must be understood as follows. God told Moses at midnight, but from the fact that when Moses came to Pharaoh, he said about midnight, apparently Moses was uncertain about the exact moment of midnight. Moses, the greatest of all the prophets, was uncertain, and David knew. Keep going.
Does
Yeah.
anyone have any response to this? It's actually kind of funny, but and not a bad point.
Oh, I mean,
Could-
God, I mean, I think time is probably an irrelevant concept to God. It should be. And by the way, midnight is different depending on where you are on the globe. Presumably God would know that.
But the point, I think the point was on this one is that Moses was humble, unlike some people that we know. Yeah.
That's somebody in my,
Oh, that was a good one, Toby. It was humble and wouldn't know for sure when midnight. He would not presume to know when midnight was.
okay. Actually, it's a pretty good description of how Moses approaches a lot of things.
Right.
He
Right.
always
But
sort of
David
exhibits
knew.
his ambivalence.
David was absolutely certain because he was
Yeah.
a different type of person.
Well,
David's like our
warrior.
worst classical mansplainer, I feel like.
Mansplainer.
Right?
I'm almost getting to be so amazed by how they're making this such of a big deal about this whole thing with
Yeah.
David. They're bringing Moses now back to Hashem, everybody's involved.
Uh,
All because of midnight.
Well, we have to know when we have to say the Shema is the whole thing, and we have to know what watch it's on. Otherwise, we might make a mistake and
true.
say it too early or too late, and
Okay.
then God forbid.
Well,
I thought that was
something
I always thought that was already answered, but go ahead.
something I was just researching real fast. They had water clocks in
Not so.
Babylon and Egypt as early as 1500 BC.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they could have actually have divided the day and the night very accurately into 12 equal increments for each period on both day and night, so that they would have actually known when midnight actually was.
Yes, but what they were trying to do is to go by the sun and the moon, and when the stars, those 3 stars came up. So
Yeah.
we would divide it that way. That doesn't mean that they would divide it that way. They weren't as scientific creatures like we are.
And they weren't going to do what the Egyptians and the Babylonians did. They went their own way. Whether it was as accurate or not wasn't the point. It was their way.
Okay, let's keep reading. We're going to get another tradition here of David's alarm clock.
The Gemara offers several answers to this question. David had a sign indicating when it was midnight. As Rav Aha bar Bizna said, that Rabbi Shimon Hasidah said, a lyre hung over David's bed. And once midnight arrived, the northern midnight wind would come and cause the lyre to play on its own. David would immediately rise from his bed and study Torah until the first rays of dawn.
Wind chimes.
That's a lovely image.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Once dawn arrived, the sages of Israel entered to advise him with regard to the various concerns of the nation and the economy. They said to him, our master, the king, your nation requires sustenance. He said, go and sustain one another, provide each other with whatever is lacking. The sages of Israel responded to him with a parable. A single handful of food does not satisfy a lion, and a pit will not be filled merely from the rain that falls directly into its mouth. But other water must be piped in. So too, the nation cannot sustain itself using its own resources. King David told them, go and take up arms with the troops in battle in order to expand our borders and provide our people, whatever that was. You got cut off.
The opportunity for a livelihood.
Oh, the opportunity for livelihood. Sorry that the sages immediately seek advice from Ahithophel to determine whether or not it was appropriate to go to war at that time and how they should conduct themselves. And they consult the Sanhedrin in order to receive the requisite license to wage a war under those circumstances. And they asked the Urim.
Hold on for a second. First thing to say is we know that this whole notion of Sanhedrin existing and having a role like this is total later mythology of the past, right? This is not actually anywhere near reality.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the setup that the rabbis have imagined here. It's kind of amazing that there would be a panel of people that would be in charge of determining whether or not this is an ethical war.
Well, it's even more than that. What they're saying is that the kingdom, the only way the people of Israel could survive and flourish and eat wasn't by their own devices, but by going and conquering another nation.
Interesting.
So the assumption that the only way they could thrive and sustain themselves isn't through their own effort. Israel is not strong enough or doesn't grow enough to do that. They have to go conquer someone. And no one questions this.
Yeah, you're right. Interesting.
Yes, it's describing an imperial power or the beginning thereof.
Yeah. And even more so to take all these, this is the mythological fantasy of a group of powerless rabbis living in exile in Babylon, imagining a historical reality of a king who was, they've turned into a rabbi. Yeah, right. The whole piece is, yeah. Okay, let's keep going.
And they asked the Urim v. Tumen whether or not they should go to war and whether or not they would be successful.
Magic dice.
Wow.
Annie, not everyone knows what those are. Those were part of the breastplates of the priests, and they had stones in them, and they would use it to answer questions. This is after Moses. So now they're bringing magic into it in order to determine whether it was okay to go to war and whether they would be successful. I guess if they weren't going to be successful, they weren't going to go.
And it's worth passing on that they here being the rabbis of the Talmud are using magic just like we use magic, meaning it always happens in the past.
Right.
Right. They're not suggesting the Urim and the Tumim for their moment. These are things in the past that magic worked.
They don't even have those stones anymore.
Totally. Yeah. But you go back to the time of Moses, they would have told the same stories about there used to be magic, right? Like, okay, let's keep going.
Rav Yosef said, upon what verse is this Agadah based? As it is written, and after Ahithophel was Yahu-Yoda, son of Benayahu, and that name there. And the
These are
general
some
of the
names right here. Wow.
Yeah. And the general of the king's army, Yoav, the individuals named in this verse correspond with the roles in the Agadah as follows.
I like how someone asked the question, like, where did you get this crazy story from?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ahithophel is the advisor whose advice they sought first with regard to going to war. And so it says, now the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counseled in those days, was as a man who inquires of the word of God. So was the counsel of Ahithophel both with David and with Absalom.
Excuse me. What's Absalom?
Absalom was his David's son.
Oh, the oldest son? Is that the oldest son?
That I don't remember.
One of the sons.
Was killed.
Yes, probably. Well, he was the rebellious one who actually made war against his father.
Somebody else wants to read it, or you want me to keep reading?
Trying to think, do we have looking to see where this section ends.
I think it's interesting that, the names of these generals, and they do show up in, the Book of Kings. And specifically, it's not always clear which one of these generals remains loyal to David and which plots against him. So even this is kind of a mythologizing of,
Nice.
the cast of characters.
Nice.
And they also say that this, whoever his name is, Tuakal, he consults with God. So they're putting back the whole thing of whether they go to war through intermediaries, but they're leaving it on God's hands of whether they go to war.
Yeah.
Nice. I want to zoom back in on what Renee said there too for a second, because I think it's I'm really intrigued by that observation and sort of this notion that whenever we tell stories of the past, in some ways, we are mythologizing ourselves and not just the past, right? And you can see those layers of it here, right? And we've got the distance to be able to see that they're mythologizing themselves through creating a mythology of their own past. Though there's then the even added layer that we are mythologizing them right now, and they're mythologizing of the past to define our present right here.
But it's interesting also that they strive to establish a sort of line of inheritance. I'm quoting Rabbi so-and-so who had it from this rabbi, who had it from another rabbi, who had it from the original guy himself. So in other words, they claim authority via this line of succession.
Totally. Okay.
Do we, in a way, you know?
Yeah, as do we.
We are. That's what we're doing right now, really.
Right now.
Well, if we were good enough at it, we should be able to go all the way back to Moses. And that's the whole thing of the Talmud, is that the Talmud traces itself, or our history traces us back to Moses, and it's given to Moses, to Joshua to, I don't know, remember who, but it goes in a line of succession. And they're trying to establish themselves as part of their line of succession.
Imams still do that. If you know an imam, they will have a document that's a piece of paper that traces from them to their teacher, all the way back to Muhammad.
You know, we're talking about myth here, and there's a term, mythology for religion is defined differently than a myth like Hercules, and that it's, and I forgot the exact definition for it. Danny, did they use that at rabbinic school?
The definition of myth that I always give is that a myth is a story that tells you who you are, where you came from, and how you're supposed to live in this world.
Okay.
And that in that sense, myth is a frame that we put on a story rather than any claim of historicity itself.
Okay.
So the two examples I always use, and if you've heard me say this, then you've heard these examples, are the Alamo, because the Alamo is a myth to Texans and just history to everyone else. Right? By the way, I finally read up on the Alamo, and like the Alamo people were all racists who were fighting for slavery. And that's what they were about.
Excuse me, I am a Texan.
Remember that.
Basically, they wanted to take the land that belonged to Mexico from the Mexicans.
Yeah.
They were imperialists and racists. Yes.
But so I give this example because it's an example of something that is true, that happened. But when people in Texas say, remember the Alamo, they're talking mythology. They're not saying, like, remember the specifics of this historical event, right? Because it tells them who they are, where they came from, and how they're supposed to live in the world. Texas, right? But the other example I give is George Washington and the cherry tree.
Perfect.
Didn't happen. Also a myth, because the whole story is not about George Washington. It's about what it means to be an American, right? And as we all know, what it means to be an American president is that you never lie.
Oh my God. Sorry.
No, I thought it meant these days you always lie. But the myth, the founding myth of Judaism is the coming out from Mitzrayim, and the fact that we were slaves, and we build the religion on that, and we get, we make our kids into young radicals, because if someone is enslaved, then it's as if we're enslaved and we have to help free them.
And the founding myth of rabbinic Judaism is that when the Torah is given, there's an oral Torah given as well that's written down as the Talmud. And that's what we're studying is functionally that. And in fact, what we're talking about is the fact that this is a myth that is not accepted and believed as being historical by most of the contemporaries of the rabbis of the Talmud. And so they are creating those layers as they go. And that's what we're seeing in real time here.
I think we get into trouble because so often in a contemporary way, the word myth is used to mean some archaic superstition that's been superseded by our current, some more scientific or rational understanding. And there's a failure to recognize that even those are myths, that we labor under, that there's a certain kind of societal convention, and that the myths of the past have a certain
Validity.
what do I want to say? A certain kind of
Power.
truth that that supersedes actual occurrence. A certain kind of a spiritual truth or emotional truth, or just an identity truth. I don't know.
Rabbi Susan, when talking about the Torah with the kids, has always said, and I picked it up, is it doesn't matter whether it really happened or not. Well, we don't know if it really happened, but there is, quote, truth to be learned from what happened. Like the story of not Adam and Eve, but I always like to think of the coat of many colors. There's truths about family life and favorites and all that kind of stuff that we can learn from it, whether it happened